There's been a lot of work on vocabulary. Oh, when I can't say vocabulary, you know I'm really in trouble. There's been a lot of work on vocabulary levels, and I've sort of come to the conclusion that quite a few years ago we probably got it wrong to a certain degree. Nowadays, when I think of vocabulary levels, I think we need to distinguish vocabulary frequency levels from vocabulary for special purposes levels. Whereas in the older days, we used to put them into one sort of system. But by having these two systems, it's possible to put them together. And so it goes like this. So nowadays, when we think of vocabulary frequency levels, then we have the high frequency vocabulary. That's the same. The sort of general feeling nowadays is that rather than being 2,000, it should be around 3,000 words. In my heart of hearts, I still stick with 2,000. But the majority seem to be moving towards 3,000 high frequency words. And then we have which is a new level, which I think is a very important level, and that's the mid-frequency word level. And so nowadays then, if we think of this as being around 3,000, then the mid-frequency words are another 6,000, and that takes you to a total of 9,000 words. And the reason for distinguishing the mid-frequency words from the low-frequency words is because that group of mid-frequency words seems to be a reasonably stable list of words, and also it seems to be a kind of minimum that you need for dealing with unsimplified text which is not vocabulary controlled. And so it's quite a reasonable goal. It's also a very sobering sort of goal, because if you think of native speakers as acquiring, young native speakers as acquiring about 1,000 words a year, then a goal of 9,000 words is a very substantial goal for somebody learning English as a foreign language. Okay. And then after this we have the low frequency words. And I can't put a figure there for how many there are. We don't know. And I'm struggling to make word lists which go up to the 30th thousand. And I really am struggling. I'm up to about 28,000. And it's so hard to find words which are not very, very narrowly specialized, which you could put into word lists to take you up to about 30,000 words. So it's an enormous amount of work, and I'm not sure I'm going to make it for that. Okay, so we've got the low frequency words. If I had to put a figure on it, I'd say that in English there are probably about 50 or 60,000 words. The Oxford people think there's 1 million. They talked about the millionth entry to the Oxford Dictionary. But when you look at what they count as a word, it's certainly not what I count as a word. They're using phrases, they're using polysemes and all sorts of things. And I think that's way out of the ballpark. So these are frequency levels. And then we can see these as being, you know, it's like vertical lines. You're moving from one frequency level to the other frequency level. And I think it's really important. The message from these sort of corpus studies and things like that is frequency and range combined should be the major determinants of the vocabulary that learners learn, and the order in which they learn that vocabulary, very roughly, very roughly. Now, because, you know, this goal of 9,000 is such a formidable goal, we need to try and find shortcuts so that learners of English as a foreign language can get a usable working vocabulary to deal with the kinds of text that they have to deal with. Come, seat in the middle here. Just come down. I'm not worried. Just pile in there. Okay. Now the first of the very commonly known lists, which we use to try and have a shortcut to get to what learners really need, is the academic word list. And this book here that Averil Coxhead and I worked on, Reading for the Academic World, tries to deal with the academic word list and teach the academic word list. I'm still very happy with that list. That was made about 17 years ago, a bit over. So it's probably older than many of you in this room. Yeah, I'm dreaming too, never mind. Okay, and the academic word list is a list of 570 word families, and it follows on from, not from the 3,000, but in those old days it was 2,000. It follows on from that. It was treated as the next level. I think the academic word list was very carefully made. If we did it again, I think we would do it differently. And the way we would do it differently would be to not assume knowledge of the first 2,000, but then to just say, here is an academic word list, regardless of frequency levels, and then divide the academic word list into frequency levels according to these levels here. Now, at the moment, what the academic word list is, it's a kind of way of getting into the mid-frequency words very quickly for people who are going to do academic study. And it's a very important way of getting in, because this academic word list covers around about 12% of the words in commerce texts. It gets lower for science texts, but it covers much more than the next 1,000 words, you know, the first of the mid-frequency word list would cover. So you get a very, very good return if you are learning for academic purposes. The other kind of special vocabulary, where quite a lot of work is being done, and quite a lot of work remains to be done, is on technical vocabulary. And technical vocabulary is vocabulary closely related to a particular subject area. There are two sorts of ways of defining or classifying technical vocabulary. One is technical vocabulary, which is also vocabulary in common usage. So if you study anatomy, then words like leg, neck, nose, chest, and all of these are technical terms in anatomy. They are very closely related to the subject matter of the field, but they are not words which are specialized so that people who are not in the field of anatomy don't know them. So there's one group of technical vocabulary which most people probably wouldn't call technical vocabulary because it looks like words they already know. The other group of technical vocabulary are words which are either unique to that field or unique to a combination of those fields. And to know those words, you have to do some special kind of learning or study within that field. So that division of technical vocabulary into what I've called technical can be unique or general, that's quite an important division, because it means that when learners come to a technical field, the friendliness of that field will be a major factor determining how much vocabulary they have to learn. Is a large proportion of the technical vocabulary words that are already known but used in more narrowed ways? Or is the technical vocabulary of the field really unknown, new words that they have to struggle on? To be a doctor, my estimate is that learners probably have to learn about 20,000 new words, at least 20,000. So they effectively would have to double their vocabulary size in order to be a doctor. It's a very heavy field for technical words which are unique largely to that field. Okay, so these vocab levels then we can regard as being sort of like horizontal levels. And I think that in future research, when people work on academic vocabulary or work on technical vocabulary, it's quite good that the way the field is going at the moment is to say, well, let's look at the technical vocabulary. Now that we've got a list of it, which of those technical words are in the high-frequency words, which are in the mid-frequency words, and which are low-frequency words, and so on. And then that way, learners can come in to learn at the level which is appropriate to their current proficiency level. So I think it's good then that this is happening in the field, but it's a bit different from the way we used to do it. Okay, vocab factors affecting text difficulty. When learners come to read academic text, what makes that text difficult from an academic vocabulary or from a vocabulary perspective? The first thing I think is the number of unknown words. When you come to a text which is not vocabulary controlled and you want to read in that text, there's these new words which occur, and they occur quite often in the text, but the number of them can be very large. If you have to read a text of 50,000 or 100,000 words long, then you're looking at several thousand different unknown words. And that's a really, really heavy burden. This afternoon, I'm talking about simplification or vocabulary control. And this really relates to that. One of the major effects of vocabulary control is to get rid of those or reduce the number of those unknown words which are not immediately useful for anyone working with that text. And it seems to me that that's the major barrier, simply the number of them. Now, related to that, the second difficulty is the difficulty of density, and that's clearly related to number of unknown words. But the density of unknown words has an effect on the difficulty of text. And for me, this is sort of almost common sense, because if you are meeting one unknown word in every line, and the unknown word in each line is a different word from the ones met before, then that's very, very difficult and very depressing thing to do. I'm struggling away at reading Thai at the moment. I've started to learn to read Thai about 5 times in my life. This time I'm determined to succeed. And I've been going for almost a year, and I do a minimum of about 10 minutes to 15 minutes each day, and I never miss a day. I missed yesterday. Oh, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. On the train here, I worked on my flashcard program, learning the things. So yeah, I haven't missed a day yet. And I'm getting to that point, but I'm still at the point where my vocabulary is not big enough to have a density which is much beyond, one unknown word per line or something like that. It's quite a struggle. Okay. Now, if you flip over your page, you'll get some indication of this idea of density. So I've got examples here from an anatomy text and an applied linguistics text. Here we have the high-frequency words, 2,000, make up 60.4% of the unknown. Anyone haven't got a hand up? I've got a couple here. No, that's all right. Okay. So they make up about 60% of the unknown words. Now that's really low, and you'll see the reason for that as you look down. And then we have the academic word list, not performing as well as it does in other areas, but still doing pretty well with only 570 words, still giving 4% coverage. So it's still worthwhile learning, but you can see that. And then you have the technical words, 23.6%. So 1 out of every 4 words in an anatomy text is a technical word, and those technical words are not high-frequency words or academic words. They are words which are fairly unique to that subject area of medicine. So 1 out of every 4 words is like that. And so that in a line, that's 2.5, yeah? And on a page, 300 words per page, that's, well, I can't do it. Okay, good. So, and then you have the mid or low frequency words down by 11.8%. Now, they're the ones which are really a bit problematical because they're not particularly useful for the learners who are reading the text. And if we had some way of adapting this text, then they'd be the words that we'd try and deal with and get rid of. One of the big things holding up the field in a way in helping learners is that when learners have to read special texts, copyright stops us from making electronic versions and adapting those texts closer to the level of the learner. If there was some way around that where we could get publishers to agree to let learners of English as a foreign language get texts which are adapted, that would be an enormous step forward. Because now it's relatively easy to adapt those texts. Rob Waring's developed a really good program to do that. Lawrence Anthony's got one Antword profiler to do that. It's no longer as difficult as it used to be to turn a text without vocabulary control into a text with vocabulary control. I could turn a novel, for example, into such a text. It would take about probably 8 hours. A novel about 100,000 words long. Now, 8 hours seems a lot of time, but that's a book with 100,000 words, and then that can be adapted to a level of a learner relatively simply with these programs. In the old days, boy, oh boy, you had to look at the lists and then look at the text and check all of these things, but these programs are fantastic now. They make it so much easier. It's still a lot of work. Okay, look at the applied linguistics text and see the contrast here. High frequency words, almost 80%, and then the academic word list, 13%, really doing well in such a text. So you're getting up to about 90% just from knowledge of those high frequency words in the academic word list. You can really see the value of the academic word list there. You know, just over one word in every line will be a word from the academic word list. You learn those 570 words, every single line of the text will contain at least one of the words from that list. Really worth learning. And it's not hard. 570 words. We have an intensive English program where learners have a 12-week course. It's about 20-something hours a week before they go to enter university study. We can get through most of the academic word list in that time so that by learners reach the end of the course, they have a good control of that word list. Usually they come in knowing a reasonable amount of it anyway, but even the ones who are low down can get on top of that in such a course. Okay, so just for comparison down below, I've given you a novel, for example. It says a novel, high frequency vocabulary, first 3,000, 90%, the mid-frequency vocabulary, 9%. So you're getting to 99% in a novel with just, with the high and the mid-frequency vocabulary. Okay. The third one we've got here is the usefulness of unknown words. So we've had the difficulty when people come across a text of the large number of unknown words. And then we have the density, which is, of course, related to the number. And then we have the usefulness of the unknown words. When people deal with vocabulary, the problem is that a very large proportion of the different words are actually words which occur only once. Half of the words in any text will occur only once, half of the different words. And these texts can come from a range of word frequency levels. And so, in many cases, they represent wasted effort for people who are struggling to read that text. You look up the word, you do something about it, and you're not going to meet it again for a year, maybe 2 years, depending on how much you read. There are words you won't meet again for 5 or 10 years. And so, if half of the different words in the text are one-timer words, and many of them are like this, then this becomes a major issue in dealing with the text. It's inescapable to me that vocabulary-controlled material is so important for making language learning efficient. And, it's a battle I've waged all my life between those who want authentic texts, which are written for native speakers as the fodder of language learning, and people like me who want vocabulary-controlled texts, which make learning more efficient and much more effective, and also much less painful. The last factor is repetitions of unknown words. In general, the unknown words in text that learners will be reading for academic purposes will not really be repeated. And the difference with academic text is that many of those words will be technical words. And so they are worth learning even though they're not repeated. Because part of the knowledge of the field is knowing the technical vocabulary which is part of that field. And so this is what makes academic text a bit different in that those technical words are words which must become part of the learner's vocabulary. Okay, let me pause there for a minute. Any questions, comments, criticism, praise? Yeah, okay, question, Guy.
Regarding the anatomy text reference earlier, technical words at 23%, would you include the proper nouns in that classification, or would you have converted them to common nouns?
Some of the proper nouns will be technical words. So if you have Asperger's or whatever like that, they'll be classified as technical words. Yeah. I think you have to be, when you look at proper nouns, you've got to be pretty careful to make sure that proper nouns are not simple.
Obviously in these technical areas, there are a lot of them.
There are a lot of them. And then you'd also include abbreviations as well.
Yes.
Yeah, because, is it RMI or whatever it is? Or, I don't know. I better be careful if it's some illness I shouldn't talk about.
And just, again, on the novel, the names of all the characters, you strip those out for this evaluation.
Well, for this one, we're just including them with a high, because we're assuming that they don't require previous knowledge.
Right. Okay.
So before you read a Jane Austen novel, you don't have to know who the characters are. You learn them as you go along. Yeah. But it seems to me that there's a real good piece of thesis research, or several good pieces of thesis research to be done looking at the nature of proper nouns. I think some proper nouns require a considerable background knowledge. And it'd be interesting to try and see how many proper nouns really need to be considered not as proper nouns but as part of vocabulary to be learned. And I think some of the major cities and countries of the world come into that. If people say London or Tokyo, it's got it's not just a name that you learn while you do the reading. It's a name where you bring enormous background knowledge to the reading. Yeah, and Socrates, Plato, Einstein, all of that, they are proper nouns which I think need probably to be treated like words to be learned. Yeah. Go on.
May I ask for some clarification about the academic readiness?
Yes.
I would like to know how you constructed it. Did you use Greek and Latin roots, or did you have some other?
No. It was constructed by getting text from 4, what we would call in New Zealand, faculty areas. So it was commerce, law, science, humanities. And then each of those 4 areas had 7 subdivisions. So humanities would have something like geography, literary criticism. I'm a humanities major and I can't think of a single other humanities subject area, but there were 7 of them. And the same for science. And to try and get some kind of balance, law was also subdivided into 7 areas like torts, criminal law, civil, and things like that. And then a range and frequency count was done of those academic texts. There was close to 1 million words of each type, which at the time was a big number because it was done 20-something, almost 20 years ago. So at the time that was quite a big number. And then it was run through a computer program. It's almost biblical actually, because it was the early version of the range program. And the computer ran for 4 days and 4 nights. And at the end of 4 days and 4 nights, the tablet came down, it sort of felt like that. The computer programmer was horrified and went back and reprogrammed it so it wouldn't take 4 days and 4 nights. But I sort of liked the 4 days and 4 nights. And then, so from that then, the words which, each word in the academic word list had to occur in all 4 areas. Each word had to occur in at least 15 of the 28 subdivisions, 4 times 7, yeah? But most occurred in many more than 15. That was a minimum. And then the words which were already in the first 2,000 words of English were excluded. And then the last criterion was each word had to occur at least 100 times in the 3,600,000 word corpus. And so that meant that that the words were wide range. No matter what subject area you studied, those words would be useful, and then they would be frequent enough so that you would meet lots of examples of them. And then the words were divided into sublists of 60 words, except the last one had 30. Yeah. And so the sublists are quite interesting because the sublists, the first sublist of the academic word list, which is 60 words, covers 3.6% of the text. Now, if the whole academic word list covers 13% or 12%, just the first 60 makes up about 40 of that. And then the second word list of 60 words covers 1.8%, and the third covers 1.2%. What a remarkable memory for somebody my age. No, it's Zipf's law. It's Zipf's law, and the sublists follow Zipf's law, and Zipf's law say range times frequency equals a constant figure. And so that means that this is list 1. 1 times 3.6 equals 3.6. List 2, 2 times 1.8 equals 3.6. List 3, 3 times 1.2 equals 3.6. And that works right down to sublist 6. We didn't expect it. When we saw the figures, wow. The first 6 sublists follow Zipf's law, where the 1 times the percentage coverage equals the same answer all the way down. Yeah. So that's how it's made. So the words are really, really useful if you are doing academic study. If you look over here for the novel, only 2% of the words in the novel are from the academic word list.
I'd just be a little hesitant about giving my students academic word list directly, because they would study those words very diligently for a long time, and then if they didn't read regularly, they may forget the usage of the word.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't be worried about that, because when people learn the academic word list or learn any vocabulary, rote learning is good. Okay, I'm perfectly happy with rote learning, but learning has to occur across the 4 strands of learning from input, learning from meaning-focused input, from reading and listening, and real reading and listening. Learning has to occur from speaking and writing. So the academic word list is so important for academic text that they need to learn to produce those words as well. If you want to be an academic, you've got to produce academic words. In the early stages of my career, I suffered some difficulties because my students who were teachers were not native speakers of English. And so they were coming to New Zealand on special Colombo Pan aid programs to get a in-service teacher training course for teaching English. And they were not native speakers of English. And so I tried to write my books within the first 2,000 words of English. And the publishers came to a conclusion that I wasn't a native speaker of English. And because there weren't many academic words in the book, then I clearly wasn't an academic as well. So there was a bit of a problem there. The third way in which people should learn the academic word list or any vocabulary is through deliberate study. Rote learning is fine. People criticize rote learning, and when they do, you should say, show me the research you are referring to which says that words which are rote learnt are quickly forgotten. Show me the research which says that rote learning cannot be used when the language doesn't develop implicit knowledge. That is, that learning is no good when you actually use the language. They won't be able to find that research because that research, the research doesn't give that result. The research shows deliberate learning lasts a long time, especially if it involves spaced retrieval. It can last for a very long time. There's a single case study where the learning lasted over 10 years. This is in Second Language Research Journal, a study at the University of Wales where someone learnt Italian, didn't get to Italy, and so their Italian learning was, they'd done rote learning using the keyword technique, they didn't get to Italy, and then 10 years later someone thought, let's see how much this guy remembers, because he's had no chance to use Italian at all. They tested him. He knew about 60% of the words he'd learnt 10 years ago. And then they said, here's a book. Go away and come back in 2 hours or something like that. He came back in 2 hours and look at the book, come back, and they tested him again. He knew 90-something% of the words. Okay. So rote learning is good. And rote learning leads to the kind of knowledge that you need for language use. One of the most important studies in the field in the last 20 years is Irina Elgort's research, which shows that deliberate learning of vocabulary results in both explicit and implicit knowledge at the same time. Now, I've just say it again? E-L-G-O-R-T, Elgort. It's tough reading. It's in the journal Language Learning, I think it is. And it's hard reading because it's a psycholinguistic study. But it shows that when you deliberately study vocabulary, you develop conscious knowledge of it, but you also develop subconscious knowledge of it, which allows you to use that word in ordinary conversation and speaking and so on. So it's a very important study because it shows that Steve Krashen was wrong about this. Steve and I have just spent a week together in Taiwan. We're good buddies, but we know where we disagree, and we don't talk about those things. Everyone expects us to punch each other, but we don't. Okay. And then the fourth kind of learning that you need is fluency development. So you do really easy stuff. You do speed reading, timed reading, and things like that, so that you get really quick in using the knowledge that you already know. And so having those balance of the four strands is really important. So I have no problems with people deliberately learning, as long as that is only one part of a balanced course of learning. Okay, any further questions before we move on? Go on.
Is there I understand the research about deliberate learning. Can we flip it upside down and...
Say it again?
Can we flip it upside down and think of a theory or a maxim that sort of guides a theory of explicit deliberate learning? I understand the research, I agree with it. I'm just trying to think if there's a principle, maxim, or a theory that guides it or defines it.
What deliberate learning is? It's really hard to define what deliberate learning is. I mean, Jan Hulstein has tried to look at this, and the compromise he sort of made was, well, if we look at it from the point of view of experiments, how was it tested in the experiment? You know, how it was operationalized in the experiment. But it's really hard. If someone's reading a text and they guess a word from context, is that deliberate learning or incidental learning? Now, my feeling is that when you come across a new word and you say, oh, I don't know that, I have a guess, you've moved actually to deliberate attention to a language feature, which is a kind of deliberate learning. And certainly when you go and look up a word in a dictionary, or if you're very smart and you're reading electronically, you touch the word and the meaning appears, that's deliberate learning too, I think. But to draw the line is really hard. Yeah. But I think, don't get too worried about the line. Just say, you know, some deliberate learning, such as word cards, flashcard programs, really, really so effective, highly effective. I'm an anti-teaching man. I think that teachers should not really be teaching. Teachers should be organizing learners. Teachers should be planning good courses and balancing learning opportunities. Teachers should be training learners how to do learning. But to get up front and to say, here are some words, I'm going to teach them to you, I lose interest at that point because I know that that's probably 50% or less effective. About half of the words you deliberately teach are unlikely to be remembered immediately after the teaching. Plenty of studies show that. They didn't intend to show that, but that's what they show. Okay, what should teachers do? Now let me just check where I am. 11:55, yep, okay, we're still here. Okay, so if you want learners to be able to deal with academic texts, what should teachers do to help them to deal with that? The first one is make sure high frequency and academic words are well known. So one of the jobs of the teacher, along with planning and organizing, is actually to test and to see where the learners are at their present time. It always horrifies me as a vocabulary fanatic when I ask a teacher, the teacher said, oh, I've got this class of people, I'm teaching them so and so. How many words do they know? I don't know. How the hell can you teach them, show them what to learn next if you don't know how many words they know now? The tests are there. Go and get them to sit the tests. There's a nice test just developed, the picture vocabulary size test. It's one of my favorites, actually, because I never thought that you'd be able to test the first 6,000 words of English using only pictures. You can do it with people who can't read. And it's working really well. It's on type picture vocabulary size test into Google or whatever, and it'll take you to the website. It's free to download. 2 versions of the test. Lawrence Anthony and at Waseda did the programming for it, did a great job. And that's fantastic. We've been using it to test young native speakers in primary schools. Oh, that's an exercise in itself. Testing 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds. Oh, boy. We tried 5-year-olds and gave up. It was just, yeah. The 6-year-olds come in, okay, and they get down there and they sit in front of this computer and the pictures appear and they hear the sentence containing the word, and then they have to touch the picture which corresponds with the word. That's right, so they do that. Okay, next kid comes in and sits down, picture goes, puts his finger in his mouth and touches the screen. I think, oh, hell, what am I doing now? I'm going to be spreading disease through the whole school. So I've got to clean the screen. That was bad enough. Next kid comes in, sits down. And I think, what the hell's going to happen next? Someone got to come in and scratch their backside or do something like that. Oh boy, that was but that was really good. Yeah, my parenting skills have to come back. You've got to wipe their noses and do all of those things while they sit the test. Oh boy, oh boy. Yeah, see you, Tom. Okay, so diagnostic testing is really important. So that one way of making sure they're well known is to find out how many words of the academic word list do they know. Within 2 weeks, there will be a test on my website testing the academic word list. I was horrified to search on the web and find that there actually isn't a test easily available to test the academic word list. There is a test within the old vocabulary levels test, but you've got to know about the vocabulary levels test, and you've got to take that out of the test because the rest of the old vocabulary levels test isn't really that good. The new vocabulary levels tests are much better, based on better word lists. But I have got a test of the academic word list, two tests, and they'll be on my website. So it would take learners about probably 10 or 15 minutes to sit the items in the test. And you could find out how many of those 570 words they knew. Word card study, good way of making sure they're known. Most cell phones now have a flashcard, you can run flashcard programs on them. I think a lot of dictionaries, which you can find on the web, which are bilingual dictionaries, incorporate some kind of flashcard learning. With my learning of reading Thai, I've got a Thai dictionary, and whenever I look up a word, I can then choose to put it into my word list to learn or not. And that's a very efficient way of doing it. And then extensive reading is a really important way of getting learners, and extensive reading within academic areas. The problem is there isn't a lot of vocabulary controlled text in academic areas. But if you look at the mid-frequency readers on my website, at the end of my website, we've now got about 14 or 15 mid-frequency readers. About half of them are factual text rather than fiction text. And these are ways of getting some vocabulary control beyond the graded reader level. Okay, the second thing that teachers, I think, should do is inform learners about vocab levels and technical words. And that is, learners should know about word frequency. It's quite good to get them sit down and just use the frequency program, which you can get with the range program on my website, but also lots of other ones, where you just put a text in and you turn it into a word list, and they suddenly see, wow, some words are really common and some are very, not all words are the same frequency. Learners should understand the nature of that, because then they can understand why are you learning these words, and what word should you learn next? An informed learner is a much better learner than an uninformed learner. We call, Arthur Lydiard, who trained middle distance runners to be Olympic champions in New Zealand about 30 or 40 years ago. Peter Snell and Murray Halberg and Dick Quacks and all those people won medals at the Olympics. He used to say, when you're training these runners, you should explain why they are doing these activities. Why am I making you go up hills carrying weights? Why are you doing this long distance training, even though you're only going to be running a mile or a kilometre or something like that? And he said, if you explain why they're doing it, you get twice as much work out of it. Because, oh, yeah, this is helping me do so-and-so. And it should be the same with learners. I've written a book called What Do You Need to Know to Learn a Foreign Language? It's free on my website. There's a Spanish version of it. Within a little while, there'll be a Turkish version of it. And someone's working on a Thai version of it. And this has advice in about 50 pages. If you are a foreign language learner, how can you go about learning a language efficiently? I would get my learners to read that book. It's free, it doesn't cost anything. It's the right price, folks. You just download it, and it gives what I think is the most useful advice to a learner. I remember when I lived in Indonesia, trying to learn Javanese and Indonesian. I had a teacher and sit down and didn't know what the hell to do with the teacher. Shall we have a conversation? Well, I don't know anything to talk about, and this sort of stuff. And I thought, gee, after all these years, I should now be able to say, if I had a teacher, what would I sit down with that teacher and what would I do? And what would I do by myself now that we have all of this knowledge about language learning? So that's a book I wrote, which is free for all. Okay, number 3, train learners in strategies to deal with technical words. And then these strategies are word parts. I think you mentioned something about that. Word parts help words stick in the memory. There's about 20 or so prefixes. You'll find a list of them at the back of Reading for the Academic World. The Christmas is coming, folks. If you're looking for presents for your elderly parents, even your young children or your brothers and sisters, yeah, Reading for the Academic World's a good stocking filler. And it will make someone in New Zealand a comfortable retirement. Okay. Definitions. Learning to recognize definitions in text is very important. A large number of technical words are actually defined in the text, but learners have to actually be able to recognize that a definition is occurring. And it's not always clear when words are being defined. But the classic definition of something is which, that one, that's not the most common type of definition, but it's where you would start from in learning to recognize definitions. And then other forms of definitions become truncated forms of that classical definition format. Core meanings and dictionary use. Learners should be able to look up a word in the dictionary and to look through the different senses of it and to see that those different senses are really the same. If you talk about neutral colour, neutral attitude in politics, neutral in the gear shift of a car, neutral wire in an electrical circuit, all of those uses of neutral are not different words. They're the same word. That's why they've got the same name, neutral. And so learners should be able to look at that and say, oh, I have all these different meanings here, but really there's one meaning which runs through them all. And that's really important because when quite a large proportion of technical vocabulary is also vocabulary which is commonly known, the issue then becomes what's the same between those and then what makes the technical one a little bit different. But it's the sameness which will make the learning easier. Okay, word card learning and intensive reading. And this is where I think teachers should teach. I like grammar translation. I like intensive reading. I think grammar translation is good. It's a very efficient way of helping learners deal with difficult text. But it should only make up a small proportion of the course, about 1/16 of the course time. If it's a whole course, it's insanity. But for a small part of the course, a part of the deliberate learning strand, it's very efficient and effective. Okay. So I've got there intensive reading, supported individual. And then I'd add a fifth one here, I think, what teachers should do. We make our handouts and then we look at them and think about them and think, oh, I wish I'd done this, put that on, but I've already run off the copies. So we're only allowed to export a certain number of trees from New Zealand. So the fifth one I would put there would be fluency development. And that is learners studying for academic purposes should do a fluency development course. They should get really quick at recognizing the words that they know. When I'm learning to read Thai, I notice this. I go back and reread the same stuff about 3 or 4 times at least. I'm actually being brainwashed because I'm reading Thai kids' school books. I'm up to year 2 of Thai school. Yeah, I should have a little runny nose and no handkerchief and all of that sort of stuff, but I'm up to year 2. And so I'm being brainwashed in, respecting the teacher and, keeping yourself clean and tidy and following the laws of the country and all of that. It's quite interesting, actually. Yeah, so I'd put fluency development in there because fluency development, you get a small investment of time, but you get a very good return for that small investment of time. So running a course where you're only doing a few minutes each time, but over a period of about 5 or 6 weeks, one passage each class takes less than 10 minutes, and you do that, you can get learners increasing their speed by at least 50%. That's the average. And in some cases, doubling their speed. And I've probably run hundreds of courses like this. And it's always the same. You get this remarkable effect. And there's been a lot of research done on it, but that's tomorrow's talk. Okay. I think that's just about enough, actually. We can have time for questions now. Just at the end here, we can come back to it if there are no questions, but that's what can you do to make it easier to read an unsimplified text. But we can talk about that if there's time. Any questions or comments?
This is expanding on your talking about the word neutral.
Yeah.
My experience in learning Japanese, the hard words are easy. Like a word like tenteki, which is introduced drip, is an easy word. I still don't understand suru, for example. I feel maybe we assume that learners know the easy words, but they don't really know them very well. They just, suru, do, I'm done.
Yeah.
I think, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. The words that dictionary makers call polysemous are really the higher frequency words of the language. And I can remember when I was learning Indonesian, there's a word in Indonesian and Malay which is jadi. And I learned it as to mean become. And it wasn't until I was probably several months into having to use a language that I noticed people saying things like, it's sort of going to rain, jadi, so I will take, not jadi, not so. It's going to rain, jadi, I better take my umbrella. And I thought, hell, that's being used as a conjunction, not as a verb like become. And then I realized that it means moving from one state to another state. Yeah? Going to rain, take my umbrella. It's that, and so in that way, I'm developing a core meaning for that word. And I think this is a long-term process. But it's something that I think is made easier if learners are aware that this is the nature of language, and particularly the nature of high-frequency words, and that you should be looking to see. I'm driving my wife crazy at the moment because I come across a word, yeah? In Thai, there's the word polamai, yeah? And polamai means fruit, okay? And I love fruit. I time my visits to Thailand to coincide with the best fruit season. 3 best fruits in the world, round about the middle of the year. Wow. Okay. And then I come across the word pon, which means result. Yeah? And I said, hell, that pon, result, is the same as the beginning of polamai. It's P-O-L, but L in the final position in the syllable is pronounced N in Thai, the letter. And if you break polamai into parts, it means result, tree. And that's the word for fruit. result, now I'm sure that Pong doesn't mean result. I'm sure there's a more inclusive meaning. Now, when I point this out to my wife, she's, oh, yeah, I suppose it is like that, yes. But that's not something which occurs to them. But I think that's the sort of attitude you need to go in with, to see, these things, they seem to be different, but actually they're really the same. And this is part of the astonishment I find thrill of learning a language, where you suddenly see, wow, they're doing it this way, and there is a sense and an order and a system to it. Yeah.
The reason I actually asked you about word roots earlier is because it's easier for me as an English teacher to connect Greek and Latin roots to Japanese kanji. So, for example, the prefix try for 3, you can connect it to the Japanese kanji for san, since it appears in some of the same words.
Yep.
So, if I need to teach academic words to a student, I need to find an equivalent in their language that they can build on to connect it and retain the words a little bit.
Yep.
So if I find the corresponding kanji and then teach them all of the words that are related to that kanji with the Greek or Latin root, then I think I can get some similar success. I don't know if I can do that with an academic word list, because if they're not grouped according to word parts, then I can't make that same connection to their original language.
No, but let me give 2 comments. And I'm getting old, so I'm getting grumpy and things like that. But I think you're taking too much on yourself, because you talk about teaching. Yeah. And I would be saying you should be training your learners so you're doing the job of this analysis. Now, I think the way you're going about it is right. You're saying, look, just as in Japanese you do this, in English we do that. And then here is this list of word parts. And I would even be looking at word stems as well, because one of my PhD students, her thesis topic was, how many words from the 3rd to the 10th 1,000 words have a word stem which is connected to a word in the first 2,000 words? And she found that 2,000 words, 1/4 of those 8,000 words from the 3rd to the 10,000, had the same stem as the word in the first 2,000 words. And so that means that when someone comes to learn that, you can then connect that new knowledge that they have to get to the old knowledge. Now, if I were you, I'd be showing learners how to do this and saying, well, here's the most useful list of prefixes. I'm going to test you on those on Friday. And the way you can learn them is by putting them on cards with the meaning on the prefix on the back, or putting them in the flashcard program. And you should study them that way, so you train them how to do rote learning. Most Japanese learners don't really need training. But no, Japanese, there's a good study by Tinkham with compared Americans doing rote learning and Japanese doing rote learning, and the Japanese far outstripped the Americans. And Tinkham's argument was, if the learners have this skill, why aren't we utilizing this skill? But there are very good ways to do rote learning, and there are bad ways to do, or inefficient ways to do them. And you should be training learners in that. And then it's the same with the word stems. And so it's not your responsibility to be analyzing all of these words. Your responsibility is to train the learners how to do them, give them examples, get them up to the point where you can say, good, now what do I do next? Yeah, okay. Any other? Go.
Well, first of all, I have to say thank you very much. You cite an example from Thai language, and we happen to come from Thailand.
My Penrakap.
That links to what we are talking to today a lot. So my question today is one of the things over here about one of the suggestions we have here about the unsimplified text from reading L1 before L2, and I think this is from my experience from the teacher groups when we have the research meeting at our unit. I have lots of comments from people when one of the students would like to do reading from L1 to L2 for the unsimplified text.
Yeah.
And I have some suggestion from the teacher that suggests that somehow reading L1 will interrupt with reading L2 and things like that. So I would like you to clarify that point, or you can assure me that this is the case, that we can do it, reading L1, then starting from L1 and then go to L2.
Yeah. That last part here, I looked at the suggestions I'd made and then realized that you can classify them according to a way of classifying language learning techniques. And that is, so how do you help somebody deal with something that they don't know? And there's 4 major ways of doing it. One way is to take what's called an experience approach. And that is where you try and put the difficult text as much within the learner's experience as possible. And there are 2 ways of doing that. One way is you make the text, you adapt the text to match the learner's experience. So vocabulary control does that to some degree. The other way is you try and bring the learner closer to the text. And that way of reading an L1 text before reading the L2 version of the same text is trying to bring the learner closer to the text so that they now bring very large amounts of background knowledge. And so instead of having to deal with the content so much, they can now focus on the language in which that content is expressed. So I think it's a really good way. In New Zealand, no, haven't got time for that. The second way of making a text easier is to get learners to help each other. So using a group work or a shared approach. And this is a general kind of thing in language learning as well. If a task is too difficult for a learner and it's not an experienced task or you don't want to make it an experienced task, then you make it a shared task where learners help each other. The third way is to make it a supported task where the teacher does part of the work already by providing a glossary, by providing comprehension questions, which give the learners steps to follow, where part of the work which has to be done is done by the teacher and the learner works through that. And the fourth kind of learning task is an independent task, which is the goal of the other 3. And the goal of the other 3 is you don't need help. You just get on and do it yourself. Yeah. So the L1 is a good way then to deal with the content knowledge so that the focus then becomes on language features. Good. We've got 2 minutes for one last question if there are any. Or is lunch calling? Okay, go on.
So there's pretty good evidence that if learners demonstrate knowledge of a text, that we can assume knowledge of a lemma or maybe modified lemma, but probably not all members of the word family. So you talked about the AWL, which is grouped by word family. So I'm just curious, the AWL test that you mentioned, is that the test of a head word, or does it include knowledge of all members of the word family?
Yes. When the AWL was first made, the word families were not systematically created. We didn't have any system for doing it. So it's pre-1993 when Laurie Bauer and I tried to work out a series of vocabulary levels. Then we have now redone the word family levels for the academic word list, but I haven't put them on my website because I think it would just make it confusing probably. But then the academic word list, instead of being a list of 570, becomes a list of 600 and something ones according to different level of word family. I'm quite happy with that level of word family because by the time learners get to academic word list, then they should have developed some word part knowledge. And if they haven't, then that should be a very strong focus of teaching. I would see the research which shows the difficulty of learners dealing with word family members, not as a reason for simplifying down the word families, but as a reason for focusing on developing word part knowledge to bring learners up to it.
Well, not the list so much, but I'm thinking of the test.
Oh, the test.
Yeah.
I think it only tests head words.
Right.
Yeah. But it's a cheap and quick. So, okay, thank you for that. Good luck in your teaching.